going American History 1 honor students? My name is Mr. Bell. I'll be your American History 1 honors online instructor this semester. So what I want to do with this first video is kind of give you an intro to how Canvas will be set up and what you can expect each week, and then get into our first section of notes. So let me pull up Canvas real quick. Here you will see Canvas. This is all you guys can see now. This course has been published. This is Unit 1, so you can't access this information yet, but I do think it would be valuable just to kind of show you how the units will be broken down and what will be expected each unit. Rather than give you a warm-up, I'm going to give you a weekly discussion board question. You need to respond to my post with at least 1 to 2 sentences, and 2 other class members' post with at least 1 sentence. So for this first discussion board question, starting out with a fun one, that's the logo of my Black Lab Storm. An icebreaker, if you will. If you could have dinner with any 4 people in the history of the world, living or dead, let's exclude any relatives or religious figures, who would they be? And welcome to American History 1. So just go ahead and respond to that, and that will be an easy classwork grade if you complete a response to that discussion board. So for each unit, you can really expect a few things. One is the notes. Another are the review guides, which are study guides. And the other is the vocab list, of which you have 1 per unit. The last thing you can expect as far as weekly completion assignments are going to be your reading activities. Again, you guys can't access any of this yet. You will have the entirety of a unit, which will probably take a week, I would say, in your guys' case, maybe 2 weeks. Since we're working online, we got a little bit of wiggle room, and I will publish all this at once the first day of school occurs this coming Monday. And you're welcome to knock it all out. You're welcome to work on it over the course of a week or 2 and spread out, because I know you guys have a lot of other things going on. So you'll have your notes. I'm going to show you those in a minute. You'll also have your study guide. You're going to create 1 Google document or 1 word processing document if you really want to do it old school and share it as an email attachment, but it'd probably be easier to do a Google Doc that has your vocab list definitions for each unit and your review guide answers for each unit. You don't have to rewrite the questions. This vocab list is your key to a good grade. We're not going to have many tests over the course of this semester, just due to how it's structured and lack of time with you guys. No time with you guys in person, but even the people who are coming is 2 days a week. So you see, that's due at the end of Unit 1. You need to give me a basic definition for all these things. You can use your notes to do this, or you can simply Google these or look them up on Wikipedia. This counts as a test grade. So in units like Unit 1 where there is no test, this will be your sole test grade. So you want to make sure you do that. I'm going to go back. You also have these review guides. These go in order of the notes. I'll pull these up. You will answer these. So you would put after your vocab 1.1 review guide and answer the questions. No need to rewrite the questions for that. Your reading activities will be something completely separate that you will submit to me, and you're welcome to do that Google Doc or attach it to me. So for this video, though, we're going to cover the 1.1 notes, but I want to show you a reading activity before we dive into that. The way these reading activities were downloaded were as PDFs for lesson plans, which you guys aren't the teacher, so you really don't need to access that. It's not going to give you any answers. You're welcome to read through it, but you're going to read document A, document B, and then sometimes you have document C and D, and you're going to answer all of the questions. I'm not looking for you to write a book. 1 to 2 sentences to answer these will be perfectly fine. And I want you to also, when you have questions that are like get into a group or something of that nature, you can feel free to skip those. Like corroboration, for example. And if you're not understanding any of this right now, if I'm going too fast, feel free to email me. I'll definitely be lenient the first unit just because we're all getting used to doing it this way. But let's go ahead and get into the notes. So what I will do each week is I will upload the notes. You see I have Unit 1 broken down into 2 sections. You'll be able to access this. But along with the actual PowerPoint, what you're going to see is a video that is essentially me going through the notes and hitting the high points. So you have the information, and you also have a video that you can watch that is me teaching the best I can in this video format. Obviously, it won't be as good as it would be if you were here in class, but we're going to make the best with what we have. So I'm going to minimize Canvas now, and I'm going to pull up my copy of the notes, and we're going to go through these. And this is going to cover exploration and colonization. So the discovery, the quote-unquote discovery of America from Christopher Columbus, and then the colonization of America from the Europeans. Let's go ahead and start with Christopher Columbus. We all know the rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. Now, Columbus was an Italian, but he was actually sent by the Spanish to find the New World, and really to sit out and prove that the earth is round and not flat. However, Christopher Columbus, not really a good person, as he's been mythologized to be throughout American history over the decades. He enslaved many of the natives who were there that he first encountered, and it's important to note that to say Christopher Columbus discovered America is being very generous, because while he did land in what is now North America, he thought he was in India, which is why he gave the term Indians to that name, to be able to recognize the people who were Native Americans. That's why you hear Indians and Native Americans. Of course, you can be referencing Indians as in people who live in India or from India, but when you hear it from a North American perspective, Native Americans, because they were the first people here. And actually in Canada they don't say Native Americans because it's not America, they call them First Peoples. And then of course Indians. The name Indians has become politically incorrect over the past 5, 6, 7 years or so, just simply because that name, if you think about it, is completely off base. It's to say not a lie, but it is definitely a misnomer or a misconception, because Columbus thought he was in India. What Columbus brought with him was the introduction of slavery to North America, the spreading of diseases, some intentional, some unintentional, such as smallpox, influenza, the measles. Some of the first biological warfare was Columbus selling on the Columbian Exchange blankets that had smallpox in order to wipe out the Indian population and seize their land. That would also be used by other European colonists as time would pass. It was the first form of biological warfare. Tuberculosis was spread, as well as syphilis. Now, you don't have to, it says added notes. That's if you were writing this down in class. You're viewing this video. Who actually discovered North America? Well, in 992, a Viking by the name of Leif Erikson was technically the first one to set foot here who wasn't a native. And then Amerigo Vespucci in 1502, another Italian explorer, was the first one to realize that, unlike Columbus, I'm not in India, like he said in 1492, but a completely different place. America, that term is named after Amerigo, as in Amerigo Vespucci. The first treaty that we learn in here is the Treaty of Tordesillas. that divides the New World between Spain and Portugal. It was written by Pope Alexander VI. When I say the New World, I'm referencing North America. So some of these, like the Columbus stuff, I'll talk more about when it's more fact-based. I'll just run through it, and some of these I will skip. So there's going to be no state tests, so the only tests you will have are a midterm and final administered by me, and I will pick 3 or 4 of the 7.5 units we have to test you on. You're not going to be tested on Unit 1, just a quiz will be given. So why did people come to America post-Columbus? So why did the British, the French choose to colonize what we now know as America? 2 reasons: wealth and religious freedom. And not just wealth, but in particular, wealth that land brings is in new resources. Land is the most valuable commodity in the world because it's the only thing that they're not making any more of. There's a finite amount of land, and we have what we have on this earth. There were 3 regions of colonies: New England, Middle, Southern. And they worked in 3 very different ways as far as how they thrived economically. The New England colonies in the North, they used manufacturing. So I always like to say they made things. The Middle colonies focused on commerce, so they sold things. And the Southern colonies like North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, they focused on agriculture, so they grew things. They made their money through crops, initially tobacco, and of course eventually the multi-billion-dollar industry that is known as cotton. We're going to skip the royal, proprietary, and charter colonies. You can use the PowerPoint or this video to fill in those on your vocab, but we're skipping those for the purposes of this presentation. See, I told you we'd skip some stuff. Roanoke. Roanoke Island is the lost colony, quote unquote. Roanoke was actually named after, or by, I should say, not after, the Algonquin Indians. And this is the first, not successful, but it was actually the first British settlement in America. And it's in what we now know as the Outer Banks of North Carolina. You'll have to excuse that announcement. I'm going to be recording these during teacher work days and during planning, so you're still going to maybe hear some interruptions. I apologize for that. So Roanoke, or the lost colony, located in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Many of you have probably been there. Beautiful place in Dare County, one of the 100 counties in North Carolina. It fell due to hunger and sickness and was founded by Sir Walter Raleigh, hence the name of our state capital. It, of course, is Raleigh, North Carolina. So let's talk about the lost colony as from a historical and then also from like a urban legend perspective. It was the king sent Sir Walter Raleigh there to see if it would work out, and the history books will tell you it didn't work out. There was famine, there was sickness, so Sir Walter Raleigh decided to return home. It was a failure. However, 2 years later, after 1585 and 1587, when people went back to Roanoke, or what became known as the Lost Colony, there were people living there, which didn't make much sense considering the king ordered all of them home. So there's 2 ways you can look at this. From a historical perspective, some people just, kind of stayed behind on their own, were unaccounted for, they left in a hurry, and they made society thrive. Probably what actually happened. And then from a urban legend, of course, there's always that, and there was a season of the hit FX show American Horror Story based on this. There's always this in pop culture there's this desire to deem them as ghosts or spirits that were left behind, the people that died when the lost colony failed. One, of course, more for entertainment, one for historical. So since Roanoke failed, the first successful British settlement in America was actually Jamestown, Virginia. It says it's a joint stock company. That means that things were sold there for profit. Skip any videos. What you're going to see with Jamestown and with all these early colonies is there's going to be division in the ranks. Now, Jamestown was more a business than it was necessarily. I mean, yes, people lived in Jamestown, Virginia, but the focus of it was to make money for the King of England. However, as more and more people come over from England to America, you will start to see divisions in those ranks. Let's talk about one of the most famous groups, the Puritans, also known as the Pilgrims in American society. Now, the Puritans fled England to avoid religious persecution via the king. But here's the thing. They will come over here and be hypocrites because they will orchestrate some super strict and hypocritical religious persecution. So the Puritans travel here. They land on Plymouth Rock in 1621 in New England. In Massachusetts, they found what becomes known as the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This is the site of the first Thanksgiving. Of course, you know they landed here in the Mayflower. You know this from learning about Thanksgiving probably way back in elementary school. They're greeted by the Indians with welcome arms, and that is the site of the first Thanksgiving at Plymouth Rock. It won't last long until this relationship sours between the Native Americans and the Puritans. Squanto was one of the first Indians who greeted the Pilgrims when they landed, and he would share his maize or corn with them. Now, this is a more important part of this unit. On the long boat ride, weeks and weeks and weeks to get from England to America, the Puritans needed to pass the time. So, of course, they shared stories and things of that nature, but the most important things to the Puritans were religion and God. So they would pass the time by the leadership of the Puritans delivering sermons, the most famous of which was a sermon known as the Model of Christian Charity. And it was a sermon delivered by John Winthrop in 1633, in which the concept of city upon a hill came from. City upon a hill will become very, very integral to what becomes American politics as time progresses. The original idea of city up on a hill is that the Puritans need to go to America, set a godly example, be good people, be Christ-like, and that will make the natives be curious about what is making them such good people, and that would give them the opportunity to evangelize the gospel and then convert those Indians, those Native Americans, to Christianity. However, that is not how it ended up. Instead of the Puritans, the good ones like John Winthrop, instead of them really having influence, it was more extreme Puritans who would force their religion upon the natives, and if they didn't agree, in many cases, they would kill them or starve them or spread smallpox and things of that nature. So Winthrop is one of the good Puritans. So the original city upon a hill spread a godly example. As time passed and we go from the 13 colonies to the United States, city upon a hill became more a political thing, meaning that America should be a shining city up on a hill for the rest of the world. They should look to us for morality and leadership. Of course, that's debatable, especially during these times. Let's talk about King Philip's War, and this is what one of your first reading activities will be on. King Philip was a native. The natives called him by his more traditional name, Metacomet, and the Christian name that was given to him by the Puritans was King Philip. Now, what you will see as we go through early American history 1 is that there are several examples of formerly warring Indian tribes uniting to fight the white man, in this case the Puritans in Massachusetts in the New England region. Well, that's what the first example of that is what we have with King Philip's War, or Metacomet's War, and it was a very brutal, bloody, destructive conflict that spanned 3 years from 1675 to 1678. You see the statistics from this war. Now, when you compare these numbers to, say, the deaths in World War II, in which you had 62 million people die, or World War I, where you had 23 million people die, 3,000 Indians, 150,000 Puritans killed. It doesn't look like that it was that bad of a conflict. All of these are human lives, and they need to be looked at with empathy. However, when you think about the percentage of the population, which at this point was very low, then it puts it into better scale of how bad this King Philip's War actually was, and also the property damage. So with King Philip's War, the natives in the New England region banded together to fight the Puritans. And you see 150,000 Puritans died and 3,000 Indians, and you're like, oh, looks like the Indians won this conflict. But keep in mind, this was after Puritan disease had dropped their population in New England from 140,000 to 10,000. So 3,000 out of that 10,000 estimated population, not quite genocide. They weren't completely wiped out, but it was heading toward that direction. 1,200 houses burned, 3,000 cows slaughtered. But in the end, you had something very dramatic when the Puritans would publicly behead King Philip, put his head on a stake, on a spear, an Indian spear is what they put it on, and they marched it to Plymouth Rock, which at this point had become a port in which you had several ships from Europe. That would be the first place they would land once they got to North America. So the Puritans, who were supposed to set a godly example, send a violent example by putting his head on an Indian spear, putting it on the coast at the port at Plymouth Rock, and when other ships would come in from North America, they would see his head there for 20 years, which quickly deteriorated and became a skull. But there was a messaging signal behind this, that being that this is no longer Indian territory. This is now Puritan. This is now the white man's territory in New England. And here's your warning. The bravest, the toughest Indian chief of the time period's head on his own spear. So many people within the Puritans decided that these people are kind of cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. They're way too extreme, they're way too violent, and they're actually losing their touch on what God really sent them there to do. And they begin breaking off from the Massachusetts Bay Colony and creating what will become the first 13 colonies. And of course will be the first 13 states once America becomes the United States of America. The first two people to do this are Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson. They break off, they found Rhode Island, and they have more traditional Christian beliefs, and they're not as hypocritical or destructive, or they don't persecute as much, or really, if at all, like the Puritans do. Easy way to remember this is Rhode Island has R-O, so does Roger Williams, so does Roger, I should say, and these two are usually paired together on a quiz or test. No test for Unit 1 this year. What you see after Rhode Island is when new colonies are founded, they become specific to religious groups. One of those are William Penn, who founds the colony of Pennsylvania, which is a Quaker settlement. The Quakers are the best of the bunch when you talk about these early colonists in North America. Yes, they were devout Christians, but they were pacifists, meaning they didn't believe in violence. And they were tolerant of many other, again, announcements. They were tolerant of many other religious groups. They didn't feel the need to force their religion on other people. They also didn't look down on women. They viewed them as more equals, which was unprecedented for the time. And the biggest thing here is they treated natives fairly. They didn't just go in and take their land because they were white. Instead, what they did was they bartered, they traded, and they negotiated peaceful land deals with natives instead of just taking their land. You also had Lord Baltimore, who founded Maryland for the Catholics. Georgia would be a prison colony. And the reason is that in Florida, which was occupied by the Spanish, and then you have here the Carolinas, where we're at, the Carolinas occupied by the British, of course Georgia occupied by the British, they wanted to create a buffer zone. So they felt pretty confident about their naval superiority here. So they knew that the Spanish weren't going to take this route and go from Florida and travel the Atlantic Ocean, so they had to prevent them from going this route through Georgia. So they put several prisons where they put their most notorious criminals in order to prevent or discourage, it didn't completely prevent the Spanish from traveling through Georgia. Now, the biggest early crop, the big cash crop in North America is tobacco. Tobacco is discovered and a recipe perfected by John Ruff, who will become the husband of the Pocahontas. Now, if you've seen the Disney movie, in the Disney movie she marries John Smith. That's not what happened in real life. Instead, she married John Ruff, and tobacco becomes a multi-million-dollar industry and a multi-million-dollar export crop for North America. The South, again, they depend on agriculture. The thing that makes the South depend on agriculture instead of, say, the North is there's so much, not just warm heat here in the summer, but humidity, meaning moisture in the air, that it makes it a very apt place to grow tobacco. Again, tar and turpentine was another name. Another tar and turpentine were other big exports. So was rice and indigo. Indigo is a dye. You have two types of crops as far as labels. You have staple crops and cash crops. Cash crops are the crops that make the most money, tobacco and eventually cotton. Staple crops are crops an area is known for. So a crop can be both a staple crop and a cash crop. So North Carolina is known for tobacco, so it's a staple crop for North Carolina, but it of course is the ultimate cash crop. A lot of the labor was done by two different groups, indentured servants and slaves. We're going to talk a ton about slavery throughout the course of this class. When it comes to indentured servitude, it's important to understand that there is a difference. Indentured servitude is chosen, slavery is forced. Oftentimes, indentured servants were poorer people who would trade work for, say, passage to England from more wealthy people. So say you were in England, you wanted to come to North America, you wanted to come to what will become the United States. What would end up happening is you would say, hey, I'll work on your plantation for 3 years if you give me a free trip to North America. Slaves were brought in via the triangular trade route. What we're going to focus on here is the Middle Passage. This is what brought African slaves to America and introduced African slavery. Africans were not the first slaves in America. Natives were. But as the native slaves died out, or as natives fled west or to north to Canada, what was then, of course, British Columbia, what you have is a need for slaves to fill their place. And it is actually Christopher Columbus's son who comes up with the concept of African slavery and introduces that in America. Again, we talked about the middle colonies rely on commerce, selling and buying things, but selling things. The New England colonies manufacturing, building things. The number one thing that made them money was the ships they built. Mercantilism. This means to sell more than you buy, export more than you import. That was the goal of all 13 colonies. If we're selling more than we buy, we're making money. Bacon's Rebellion was the first rebellion in North America from British colonists. It's the first time they actually spoke out against the king who was overtaxing them. It's really famous for being the first rebellion within the colonies. Bacon's rebellion is sometimes referred to as the common man's rebellion. An easy way to remember that is the common man eats bacon. Women at this time in the colonies were forced to do more traditional household duties. They could not own land at this time. England had started to practice a policy of solitary neglect toward the colonies. The colonies were making them so much money that the British Parliament, their government, their Congress, if you will, decided, hey, they're good. They don't need us. They're bringing in tons of tax money. Let them keep doing their thing. The problem is with this neglect, with them ignoring the colonies, what you have is in the colonist heads, they think, hey, they don't care about us and they're not bothering us. They must not care. They're neglecting us. And really, they need us and that tax money and our crops more than we need them. And this kind of puts the notion that they could be independent. The Massachusetts Bay Colony continues to be probably the worst of the original 13. In Massachusetts, they orchestrate the Salem witch trials, which is a persecution of the mentally handicapped and mentally ill, through burning at the stake and hangings, mainly hangings. Besides the ones we talked about with the Quakers being in Pennsylvania and the Catholics in Maryland, Jewish people form New York, and it becomes the home of Judaism within the colonies. And it's the first one to have a synagogue. When I say Jewish people founded New York, sorry, that was a misstatement. Let me correct that. It became where most Jews who were in the New World preferred to live, and therefore it would house the first synagogue, which is a Jewish house of worship. Again, we talked about slavery in the Middle Passage. Native slaves fled. They died out. They were replaced by African slaves. And that's going to do it for the 1.1 notes. I know I zipped by that, but we need to make this as efficient as possible during these crazy times we live in. If you have any questions about these 1.1 video notes, please email me, bsbell@clevelandcountyschools.org. Thank you, and stay safe.